The following presentation is a production of Ride the Wave Media.
Step into the world of A is for Adversity, a podcast where we explore the journey of motherhood. Join us weekly as we navigate the intricate garden of self-discovery amidst the trials of motherhood. This is your space to nurture your identity and bloom. I'm your host, Jen Banks. Hey, welcome to the podcast, or the pod, as they say. This week was so fun because it was April Fool's Day. And my oldest loves April Fool's Day. He talks about it for months afterwards, and I just love that he loves it. So it makes it so fun for me, and it's a creative outlet and just a good time all around. Last year, the thing that I focus on with April Fool's Day is dinner time. That is my best prank, if you will. And last year's dinner was meatloaf cupcakes with mashed potatoes on top as the frosting, and then Jell-O for the drink, and he just loved it. This year, I got him really good because I had made chicken nuggets, and he had even tried one off the pan and said, "Oh, these are delicious." And I made homemade mac and cheese as well. And then what I actually served him was faux chicken nuggets. It was a dessert-style chicken nugget made out of Rice Krispie treats, dipped in white chocolate and then graham cracker crumbs. And then the mac and cheese was a labor of love. It was vanilla Tootsie Rolls rolled into a macaroni shape, and then the cheese sauce was vanilla pudding. So it was just so funny to watch his face because he was expecting what he had just tried off the pan, and it was not that. And he said, "Oh, how did you make it look so real?" I just loved that I was able to get away with it. So hopefully you had a good April Fool's Day, and if that's not your holiday, I'm sure you have other great traditions that your children look forward to. Today's guest is Morgan Jones Pearson from the All In podcast. Oh my gosh, this is a dream. It's one of those ones where I listened to this podcast years before I had my own podcast, and then just dreaming about having her on the podcast. So I reached out a while back, and anyway, it is time to air that interview. So here we go. Hi, I am here with Morgan Jones Pearson from the All In podcast that is provided by Deseret Book. How are you today, Morgan?
I'm doing great, Jen. How are you doing?
Good. It's surreal to hear your voice because I've listened to the All In podcast, and here you are with me. So
It's always a funny thing to realize that people spend a lot of time listening to your voice, and sometimes it's like people say, "I always pictured you having like a pixie cut." I'm like, "Why did you picture that?" But we all picture something when we're listening to somebody.
it's so true. I know. Yeah. Well, let's get a sense of who you are, and then we'll move into what you do with the All In podcast. So,
Okay.
where are you living right now, and what's going on?
Yeah, so we live in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. My husband is a first-year MBA student at University of Pennsylvania. So we are here. He's in his second semester, and it's been an adventure so far. As I was reading through your questions, I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to talk about some of the reasons that it's been an adventure, but that is where we're at currently.
Great. And you recently had a baby, right?
I did. Yep. She is almost 9 months old. She'll be 9 months old in a few days. And she is the highlight of our lives. We're obsessed. Like, my husband and I both, I think when you get married a little bit older, you just like want that opportunity so bad to have kids. And he has, well, our baby is number 19, and there's already a number 20 grandkid. And so he's like always been the fun uncle. And on my side of the family, I'm the oldest. And so I do have a niece and a nephew, but just was like something that so badly, you want to be able to be a parent and to have your own kids. And so I think neither one of us take that opportunity for granted at all. And so like the other night I was talking to my grandma, and she was like, "And your husband, he loves that baby just as much as you do." And so we're both kind of obsessed. We're smitten.
Oh, so cute. I love it. Well, I used to be a faithful listener of All In, and then unfortunately, things just vie for your time, but
For
it's
sure.
interesting looking back because you weren't married, and then I listened a few months later, and then you were married, and then a few months later I heard your intro like, "Oh, I'm on maternity leave if you're hearing this." So it's just so fun to watch your journey, and it's cool, you know, as we were just talking, when you know someone on a podcast because you feel more invested in their life. I don't know. So it's been fun following your journey.
Well, I always appreciate that. There have been people that have said, like, I said a lot of prayers for you. And I think you just have no idea how much that means. Like, just the fact that somebody that only listens would care enough to pray for you. And I certainly felt that and have been really grateful for it.
Yeah, so neat. Wow. What an opportunity to have all those connections. So, what is one of your favorite books or even favorite genres of book?
Yeah. No, I love that you're asking this question. I just had a conversation with a friend who just stopped by our apartment, and we were talking about how it's hard to find like appropriate books to read. And so I tend to steer more toward classic books because it feels a little bit safer. And I'd say my favorite book ever, hands down, is Little Women, probably just because I have always connected to Joe March. And I think it's funny, my little sister's applying to college right now, and she's a senior in high school. And one of her admissions essays, she talked about Little Women and how she's always identified with Amy March. And I think that that book is just such a masterpiece because as a woman, I think you can identify with at least one of those sisters. And I just think Louisa May Alcott did such an exceptional job with that book.
Yeah, so good. Well, thank you for sharing. You can't go wrong with the classics. And I've realized recently that there are so many different types of readers who like fantasy, readers who like nonfiction, readers, all over the board. So it's a little window into your personality too.
Yeah.
What is one of your core values?
Oh man. I feel like and this may be the result of my husband and I both always say that we definitely have a little bit of scrupulosity, which we've talked
Yes.
about on All In a little bit, but this idea of like religious OCD. But I think I definitely have a bit of that. And as a result, I feel like integrity and honesty is like very core to who I am, wanting to make sure that I'm always like above the line. And I think that that drives interactions and wanting to be better and do better. So I think that would be one for sure.
Yeah, that's great. I feel like sometimes that's probably looked down upon, but I don't know. It's both sides, I'm sure. But I see that as a huge strength. So thank you for sharing that. I feel like I'm that way too a lot of the times, and obedience has never been hard for me or faith, and I consider that a blessing, and I haven't always felt that way, but I've been able to see it as a blessing recently. So
Well, and I think you're absolutely right. I think it's something that you can look at it as a pro or a con. And I certainly think like there can be I think it's important to be aware of what it is because when you're aware of it, you can be very careful that it doesn't become detrimental or dangerous in any way. But I think if you're aware of it, it can be like a real strength. And so it's interesting how that's one reason that I've felt like it was really important to talk about that on All In was if we can just raise awareness, then people that have it, and my guess is a lot more people have it than we realize. If we raise awareness about it, then it's like, oh, well, then we can take that thing that could be a weakness and turn it into a strength. So, anyway,
yeah, so good. Well, as you alluded to earlier, what is some adversity you've experienced and how has it shaped you?
yeah, so I if you'd asked me that question 6 months ago, my answer probably would have been quite different. I feel like I have had adversity in the form of being single a lot longer than I expected to be single and, like, longing to get married and have kids like I talked about before. I think I have had people that I loved leave the church that I believe in, and that's been hard. I I think there have just been different things that could be coined adversity. But oddly enough, when I read your questions, immediately what came to my mind was what my husband and I have experienced over the last 6 months. So when we moved here to Philadelphia, it just seemed like we were having like thing after thing happen that was hard. And none of it was like huge. It was like our shipment of our belongings arrived here a week late. And then there were mice in the apartment that we were supposed to be moving into, and we had to move into a different apartment. And all of this while I was 2 months postpartum and had moved across the country with a 2-month-old. So I'm like trying to handle all of this, and it feels a lot harder than it should be. And then the second week that we were here in Philadelphia, we got in a car accident on our way to church. A lady turned left at a red light and hit us. And it was pretty scary, but it wasn't a bad accident. Like we were both going less than 25 miles per hour, and it didn't seem like it was going to be a big deal. But the car has a airbag safety module that I guess was damaged in the accident. And so, long story short, we did not have a car for 6 months until last week.
Wow.
And Philadelphia is not New York City. Like, you can't get around the way that you can get around some other big cities. You kind of need to have a car, and especially with a 2-month-old. And so, for the last 6 months, I have just been like walking to the grocery store and asking for rides everywhere that we needed to go, and spending a lot of time in an apartment with a baby, you know? And just this week, my baby and I went to this music class that I've been wanting to go to the whole time we've lived here, but didn't have a car to get there. And we finally have a car. So I took her there, and they asked us, like, what is one thing that you love about yourself? And I said, I honestly probably wouldn't say this because I've been pretty hard on myself about how hard this situation has been. But now having a car and realizing what a difference it makes, I feel like I'm proud of my resilience and proud that I made it through that tough period. And I feel like I have a lot more grace for myself, recognizing, okay, like that actually was a hard thing. And so it's interesting that like sometimes I think there are these big things that we term adversity, like being single for a long time, like family members that you love leaving your faith, et cetera, et cetera. But I think other times it's just like small things that compound and result in just feeling like my husband and I had described for months, we're like, we feel like we're in a hole and we just like can't claw our way out. But it feels like we're on the verge of making it out of the hole, hopefully.
Yes, that's so exciting. And yeah, I feel like maybe the reason your perspective was different was just because in the moment and in the midst of it, it's so hard, and so you probably didn't feel like you were very resilient, but looking back, you were, despite what you were given. So retrospect is always, a lot easier to see the blessings and the gifts and the things. But one thing that I heard you say too along the way is just, oh, it wasn't a really bad accident, but this, or, it wasn't, so even along the way, you were able to pick up and keep going. And I feel like that goes along with gratitude, just in any circumstance, it could have been worse, but you're able to see the good in it too, like as you go. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, let's move on to what you do. How long has it been now that you've been hosting the All In podcast?
So we started it in October of 2018. And so we've been doing it since then. So 5.5 years. Good little while.
Yeah. Wow. And how did you get I might have heard this on the All In podcast before too, but how did you get started with it? I also know that you're friends with Emily Bell Freeman. Is that kind of how it was, or was that a different connection?
That was totally different. So I worked for Deseret News for like 4.5 years. And while I was there, the opinion editor at the time, Hal Boyd, had this idea for a podcast. And he came to me and was like, I think that we should do this podcast and we should talk to people about why they choose to remain faithful when so many people are walking away from faith. And I was like, I think that's a great idea. And he said, well, I think you should be the host. And I had never done anything like this, but I had done interviews for print written articles for years. And so I said to him, like, I don't know anything about hosting a podcast. And he said, well, you've been doing interviews for years. It's just no one's ever heard them. And when he said that, I realized like he was totally right. I had learned so much about how to conduct an interview such that like the flow was better. And if you had listened to the first interview that I did for a print article, you would have been like, holy cow, this girl is all over the place. But you learn over time. And so I had like 4 years of practice. And so we started trying to develop a podcast there at Deseret News, but they were kind of taking a different strategic direction. And we're trying to reach a broader, more secular audience. And so they ultimately decided that it wasn't a fit for them. But I soon after ended up going to their sister company, Deseret Book, and Deseret Book had kind of, the idea had been, oh, well, LDS Living and Deseret Book can do what Deseret News can't do right now. And Morgan is now there. Like they said, would you be interested in trying to do a podcast? And I was like, wow, that'd be awesome to have one that actually happens. And so we did. And it's been really rewarding, really great.
Yeah. Wow. So fascinating. Who has been one of your favorite guests that you've interviewed?
Oh man, that's always a hard question. I feel like that's like asking somebody to pick their favorite children or something. But I would say I have different ones that I love for different reasons. There are ones where I feel like the person is incredibly inspiring. There are ones where I like really enjoyed the interview and had a fun time myself doing it. I think if you were to ask me the ones that have been the most impactful, there have been a couple where it just was very apparent after the fact that God was aware of me and what I was trying to do. And I think that's probably the most important lesson that I could ever learn from All In, is that God knows us and he knows our intentions. He knows our hearts and what we're trying to accomplish. And so, for example, I got a message on Instagram. This was a few years ago. I got a message on Instagram from a girl who is recommending someone to be interviewed. And she said, this lady has had cancer for years. She ran the Boston Marathon with cancer. She is like absolutely incredible. And I made a note of her name, but I didn't immediately like reach out. And then a few months passed and this lady's name popped into my head. And so I sent a message back and said, like, I hope I'm not too late, but I would be interested. And the girl, turns out that it was the girl's mom. She hadn't said that in her original message, but she said like she's now on hospice, but I can see if she would be willing to do the interview. So we made the interview happen. It was really like kind of heartbreaking because you could hear her breath become more and more belabored as the interview went along. But it was also like really wild to me to think here was this woman that more than likely was about to have an interview of a very different kind. And I was getting to talk to somebody that was that close to that moment that all of us like prepare for and what this life is all about, I think. And turns out they had given her like 6 weeks to live. And turns out she passed away before the interview ever aired, which was just a couple of weeks later. And so her family, when they heard the interview, they got to hear from their mom for the last time, something they had never heard before. And so it was cool to me to know like Heavenly Father had called that to my remembrance, that message that I had received. He helped me know when to reach out so that I would never have like regret about it. And then he also like cared about that family enough to give them that experience. And I'm sure there have been plenty of messages that I have neglected and have fallen through the cracks, but I've always been really grateful for that one. And there have been other things like that as well. But I think those ones stand out to me because it feels like more than just a podcast, you know?
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that's a great illustration of the possibilities that I'm sure can happen in the work you've been involved in. It gave me chills as you were sharing that, so thank you. That's huge.
Of course.
What's something else that lights you up outside of motherhood? So you do the podcast. What else do you do or spend your time on?
Yeah. Well, I'd say recently it's been interesting. So I've always loved exercise. Before I got married, I did a lot of yoga. It was like very grounding for me, like really good mentally, I think. And I haven't been able to do as much yoga since getting married and having a baby. But I have found running to be like huge for me. And my husband is a big runner. I always said, like, I'm not a runner. And my husband was like, there's no such thing as somebody that is not a runner. And he's like really helped me to pace myself and to recognize that I am capable. And it's amazing, like, once you start working at running and you're consistent in it, you find yourself like building strength. And then you just want to keep doing it more because it's like, wow, like I'm really seeing some good progress here. And so I'd say in the past few months, that's like been a big thing is feeling like, so I'd say exercise in general is something that like lights me up. But I think definitely recently it's been running.
Wow. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I used to run a lot more too before I had kids, and I need to incorporate that more into motherhood. So,
Well, the nice thing about running, I feel like with being a mom is like it's not that you have to like go to a gym and like have the fitness equipment or like wait for a class to start. Like you literally can have 20 minutes and go and hit it and get a decent workout. So I personally have felt like, oh, thank goodness that you can run without a ton of like lead up or, preparation.
true. Very, very good reminder. Well, what is a way that motherhood has changed you? I feel like sometimes we try to bring our old self into a new season or new circumstance and it doesn't quite fit. So, what do you feel like has changed since you became a mom?
Oh, I love the way you put that we try to bring an old self into a new season. I think that that is so true. And it's interesting to see how a different season changes us. I think I have always been somebody that wants to say yes. Like I never have thought of myself as like a yes man, but I'm realizing now that I kind of have been. I think I wanted to be the person that like showed up for everything. And I wanted to be especially when it came to like things for church. It's like, you ask me to do it, I'll be there. And I still want to be that person, but it's been an adjustment to recognize that like I have a responsibility now that trumps even that, and that's what God wants me to do. Like God wants me to be a good mom. And I think I have very much identified myself by like things that seem really great and admirable to do. So, like for example, I've always thought that it would be so cool to speak at BYU Women's Conference.
Mm.
And I thought, oh, that would be like such a cool opportunity. And then this year, like, was going to have that opportunity. And I just did not feel good about it. And because it would mean like taking my baby across the country and having to like leave her for, anyway, it didn't feel right. And I think that I think another one of your questions says like, what's another hat that you wear? And another hat I feel like I wear right now is my husband, like I said, is in grad school. And I felt really strongly that one of my most important hats right now is to be supportive of the experience that he's having. And so it's not something like he's very much like go and do like whatever you feel like you want to do. Like we'll find a way to do it. But I have felt really strongly that it's I waited a long time to be a mom and to be a wife. And so it's not something that I take for granted. and it's something that I genuinely want to do, and I want to do it well. And so I think the thing that has changed in me is, rather than trying to be like all things to all people, I want to be, I guess, to put it in a way that's like maybe a little bit more visual, is like, to my little girl, like, I am her world. Like, I walk in the room and it's like there is nobody else in the world. And to me, like, she and my husband, like, they are my world. And so rather than trying to be all things, to all people, like, I want to be what they need me to be first. And then I can like turn my attention to other people.
Yeah, that's really good. I recently read the book Essentialism by Greg McKeown, and
Yeah,
I feel like that's kind of what you're leading to, is what are the things that are essential, and especially at this time of life. So
it's a
I
great book,
admire
by the
you.
way.
Yeah, it is so good. I can't believe it took me so long to find it, but I admire you for putting those things in the right order. And I felt some, what's the word? Reassurance when I read that book, because I was trying to be all things to all people and just do all the things, explore, and I was saying yes to all these things because I wanted to. And then in that book it was like, well, that is the way of the essentialist, to find all these things and then decide what's important from what you've done. And so yeah, I think just your wealth of experience, and also just this new role of motherhood, has pointed you to what's most important right now. So that's great.
Well, I think the thing that can be hard is, even like the best of people, a lot of times those choices to put your family or whatever first are not going to be popular. And that's one thing that I've had to realize, is like, nobody's going to be like, way to go. I just think it's not, they're not popular choices, and not something that, like, you have to, it's very personal. You have to make that choice for yourself. And I also think, like, there will be times where you feel like you should accept invitations, and there will be times where it's not possible. And so, just like you said, being very deliberate in what goes first, and making those choices.
Yeah, and the hard thing for me too is that both things are so great. It's the trade-offs, and
Yep,
just the timing, and understanding that maybe it will come back around, or there will be something even better because you made that choice. So that's good.
for sure.
Well, thank you for being on here today. Is there a quote or mantra that comes to mind? I always like to ask people that because I'm a huge quote collector.
Yeah, so I used to have a blog years ago called A Little Pencil, and that name was taken from a quote by Mother Teresa that's one of my absolute favorites, that says, "I am but a little pencil in God's hands. He does the writing. The pencil has only to allow itself to be used." And I feel like that's been kind of like my life's mantra. And to your point, like, moving into a new season, what that pencil does looks different than what it used to look like. And being willing to let God write your story, I think, in different seasons can be a harder adjustment than others. But I'm grateful for the way that He has written mine, and it's been an honor to be just a pencil.
Yeah. Wow. What a great note to end on. Thank you so much. And it's been such an honor to have you personally. And I can't wait to share this with my audience.
Oh, thanks so much, Jen. It was great talking to you.
Thank you for listening. Make sure you're subscribed and leave a review if you get a chance. I'd love to hear your feedback, and it helps others discover the podcast as well. Thank you, as always, to Ride the Wave Media with Blaine, and just so grateful for him and his production skills in making this podcast possible. I did it alone for a long time, and it's so nice to outsource that now. If you are not a part of the Daybreak business community and you live in Daybreak or you service Daybreak, I would love to have you be a part of that. I'm one of the admins, and I co-host weekly networking lunches. They are every Wednesday from 1 to 2:30. This month, the month of April 2024, they are at Harmon's in Daybreak upstairs. We'd love to see you and support your small business.